Now that we have talked about risk and return, we can now talk some more about stocks, and specifically how stocks are valued. So just to give you an overall view, just as we did in the beginning of the class concerning the intrinsic value of a company, now if you're trying to find the value of a stock, so the value of the equity of a company, notice that some things have changed. We have still a numerator and a denominator, but now the numerator is not payments that are made to all providers of funds, which are free cash flows, right? The free cash flows were just the payments that everybody receives. Now, these are very specific payments. These are dividends. So dividends are part of the earnings that although the company generates that are paid to the owners of the company called equity holders or shareholders. So the numerator has changed, and now these are payments for equity holders. And therefore, the denominator also has to change. Instead of the cost of capital that I mentioned before, now we have only the cost of equity, the return that equity holders require. I like to use this diagram because it gives you a very quick snapshot of what value is. Your text, however, would have used R sub E, right? So just take note that this is just a return by stockholders, but we have been using R sub E. So the logic is the same, right? You are discounting. Now we know that this is discounting because we saw the time value of money already. You are discounting, finding the present value of the dividends, of the payments that you expect to receive as an equity holder, and you're discounting them at the return that you require. Who are you now? You are an equity holder, so the return, the discount rate, has to be the return required by equity holders. Where is this return coming from? Remember, from CAPM. Okay? So, a few things about common stock. First of all, they represent an ownership claim to the company. If you have bought 10% of these stocks in the company, then you are entitled to receiving 10% of the profitability that's generated in the company. You're also entitled to, in case the company is sold, to receive 10% of those proceeds. Generally, they do carry voting rights. This is not necessarily the case all the time, but good governance generally is reflected in each equity holder being able to vote and therefore decide about where the firm should go. The company is the one that decides the number of shares. So when it's in the articles of incorporation, when it's newly incorporated, there's a very specified number of shares that the owners of the company, right, authorize, and the board of directors authorize. So suppose that you decide that when you're incorporating your company, that you authorize 1 million shares to be issued. This does not mean that 1 million shares will be issued. It's just that that's the authorized amount, the maximum amount. That amount can be revisited periodically, but basically, this is suppose that you have 1 million shares as authorized shares. Suppose that you have issued 500,000 shares. Okay. So if you look at the balance sheet information, you'll see that there are 500,000 shares issued. Now, what that means is that you have, of course, sold these certificates to the public. They have bought those shares, those stocks, and in return for the certificate that says that the partial owner of the company has received money because the investors buy these stocks. So the money is funding for the company, right? So the company is funding itself by selling portions of its equity. And the investors are happy with this because they expect to receive a certain compensation or return if the company goes well. They also share a high level of risk because if the company does not, then they're the ones that have residual payments, right? They're the ones that they're paid at the end. First, who gets paid? First, the employees, then the government in the form of taxes, then the bondholders, and then the equity holders. So anyways, you have issued 500,000 shares. And outstanding shares are the shares in the hands of management and outside investors. Okay, so all of us. Suppose that the outstanding shares are 400,000 shares. And by the way, these outstanding shares are very important because these are the number of shares that are used when people talk about, say, earnings per share. You may have heard this term, earnings per share. Well, that's just dividing the earnings, right, by the number of shares. But what number of shares? That number of shares is always outstanding number of shares. In my example, notice that the company issued 500,000 shares, but it only has 400,000 shares outstanding. How can this be? Well, the thing is that companies also have the right to buy back their own shares from the market. And this is a frequent situation that reflects this is, for example, situations where a company decides or believes that the market is currently undervaluing their shares. So suppose that I think that my shares should be worth $10 per share. In the market right now, it's only, let's say, valuing it at $8 per share. Then companies will say, well, if you are undervaluing, we are a much more valuable company. If you're undervaluing us, then the best investment out there is to buy our own stock from you. So if you think that we're only worth 8, let me buy from you at 8. That's a signal of undervaluation, for example. So many companies use their excess liquidity to, if they see that the stock is undervalued, to buy back their own shares. If I buy my shares, suppose, then that's why, even though I issued 500,000, currently there are only 400,000 outstanding. That means that there are 100,000 shares, more than likely, as treasury stock. What does treasury stock mean? It means that when I buy back those shares, let's just say I put them in a drawer, a treasury stock drawer. That's where I keep those shares. While they're there, they don't earn any dividends. They don't entitle me to any voting rights. They're just there so that if I wanted to, I could reissue them again at a future point in time at a higher price. Okay. They're also used many times, treasury shares, in order to compensate management. Instead of cash, using shares. So I know that this does not look very user-friendly, but just don't judge it yet. Just let me explain this very quickly. You know that the value of anything now is basically, how much is something worth? The answer is the present value of the benefits that I expect to receive, right? I hope that makes sense to you. Now, suppose I tell you that you buy a stock, and so you're an equity holder, and in return for that, you're going to receive dividend payments. So far, so good, right? Suppose I tell you that those dividends are expected to grow at a growth, so the growth rate in dividends, that is constant. Suppose I say, suppose 2%. So if I were to tell you, how much is this stock worth to you? The answer would be, well, let me first find out what I expect to receive as in the form of payments. So what would you receive in the form of payments? So if you're standing today at time 0, what would be the price of that stock? It will be the present value of those benefits of those payments. What are those payments? Well, if today, let's suppose the dividend that every stockholder receives is $1, then the future payments are going to be just that $1, d sub 0, growing at what rate? Remember, it was growing at g, at a constant rate every year. So this multiplying d sub 0 times 1 plus g is nothing more than just d1, right? What is d2? d2 will be d sub 0 growing at g for 2 years, and here's 2 years. Okay. And so on and so forth. So this would be d2. What is d sub 3? d sub 3 would be d sub 0 growing at g for how many years? For 3 years. And every time we take these dividends, right, because this is an apple, an orange, and a banana, right? These are dollars standing at different points in time. In order to be able to add them together and find a value today, I have to do what? I have to discount them at my discount rate, the rate that I'm requiring, the compensation that I'm requiring as an equity holder. So I'm going to discount them, right, to 1 plus my cost of equity raised to the first power to discount the first cash flow, to the second power to discount the second cash flow, and to the third power to discount the third cash flow. Okay, and so on and so forth. So as you can see, this is just discounting cash flows, right? They're just that these cash flows are very specific. They're called dividends. Now, we don't want to be doing this all the time because this can be very tedious. So there's a wonderful model called the constant growth model that allows us to find the value of any asset that gives us payments that grow at a constant rate. In this case, these payments are dividends. So we can use this to value a stock. But we really could value any asset that has payments that grow at a constant rate. So what does that mean in essence? In essence, what it means is this wonderful model here, right? It means that if you want to find the price of a stock today, all you need to do is all of this collapses to a very simple mathematical model. Just take the first dividend that you expect to receive in the future, the first one, and divide that by your opportunity cost of capital, your discount rate, minus G, which is the growth of whatever is on top. When you do that, it is the same thing as all of this. This is doing exactly what this is doing. So you're really discounting each dividend, making it grow at a constant rate G, and discounting it at the relevant discount rate every single year, forever. That's what this very simple mathematical model does. So in essence, the general expression for this is this, right? Go back to that. Okay. If you want to find the value of a stock at any point T, all you have to do is find the dividend, 1 year after that, the first future expected payment, and divide that by your opportunity cost of capital, the return you require on that investment, and subtract the constant growth rate. This is a constant growth model because it assumes that there's a constant growth. Now, if you tell me, oh, my growth is 0, then fine, just make it 0. Okay? And by the way, if it's 0, it's called a perpetuity because it's a perpetuity is a payment that never grows. It's just the same payment every year or every period forever. So this model can be applied to both whether you're growing or not, but typically it's used for growth purposes, of course. When it doesn't grow and G is 0, it becomes a much more simple mathematical formula. So if you want to find the price in year 2, you need what? You need D sub 3 RE minus G. If you want to find the price at the end of year 10 for your stock, then all you need to do is estimate D11 and divide by RE minus G. And if you want to find the price in year 12, what you need is to estimate dividend in year 13 and divide that by RE minus G. In all these 3 cases, I'm applying a very simple mathematical formula to find the price of the stock at different points in time. But the requirement is that it has to be that you can assume constant growth. This is the end of this presentation.